What if I told you the most unexpected political moment of 2025 didn't happen in the Middle East, but on the White House lawn, when Donald Trump looked up to see the Saudi Crown Prince arriving with full military honors and Cristiano Ronaldo stepping out beside him? This wasn't just a visit, it was a billion-dollar realignment of global power. Stay until the end, because we'll reveal the one secret deal that stunned even Washington insiders. The Crown Prince returns, Trump restores a frozen alliance. What happened on November 18, 2025 didn't look like a diplomatic visit. It looked like the return of a monarch whose shadow stretches from the Persian Gulf to Wall Street. As Mohammed bin Salman stepped out of his armored vehicle, an understated black SUV valued at $220, the White House had already transformed into a stage few world leaders ever receive. Rows of cavalry guards lined the driveway, their sabers angled in perfect symmetry. Behind them, the thunder of fighter jets tore across the Washington sky, a ceremonial flyover usually reserved for wartime triumphs or presidential inaugurations. Yet this honor wasn't for America's commander-in-chief, it was for the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, the man the West had once treated as untouchable. 7 years earlier, after the death of Jamal Khashoggi, the Saudi heir became a global pariah. World capitals refused meetings. European leaders turned their backs. Washington distanced itself publicly. But under Donald Trump's second term, that isolation evaporated like it had never existed. Trump didn't merely welcome Mohammed bin Salman back, he restored him to the center of global power. For Trump, this was not ideology, it was leverage, economics and realpolitik at its purest form. The belief that the world bends not around human rights reports, but around investment, energy and military strength. The motorcade that entered the White House gates wasn't just a diplomatic guest. It was a signal to every capital from Tel Aviv to Tehran. The Saudi-American alliance was back, rebuilt, and larger than before. Secret Service agents had spent weeks preparing for this arrival. Roads were scanned with radiation sensors. Sniper teams were positioned across the Eisenhower Executive Office building. Even Trump's limousine, the Beast, costing nearly $1.5 million, was stationed nearby in case the two leaders chose a joint movement. Inside the White House, staff whispered about the symbolism. No foreign leader had been greeted with this level of military ceremony since the early 2000s. And when Trump finally appeared at the entrance, smiling, arms open, there was no mistaking the message. The fractures of the past were being written over. The Crown Prince was no longer the exile of Western politics, he was the investor bringing $1 trillion into the American economy, the strategic partner reshaping military balance in the Middle East, and the leader who could influence energy prices with a single sentence. But what truly shocked the press corps wasn't the return of the Saudi heir, it was when a second motorcade door opened and Cristiano Ronaldo emerged, turning the diplomatic event into a global media explosion. Comment below. Do you think this moment marked a genuine alliance or a billion-dollar transaction dressed as diplomacy? The $1 trillion shock, Saudi money reshapes America's future. What unfolded inside the Oval Office after the ceremonial welcome was not diplomacy, it was the unveiling of one of the most staggering financial commitments in American history. For months, analysts had speculated that Mohammed bin Salman would expand the economic partnership forged during Trump's trip to Riyadh earlier in the year. But no one, not even senior officials at the Treasury, expected the Crown Prince to raise Saudi Arabia's investment from $600 billion to a full $1 trillion. It wasn't a negotiation, it was an announcement, delivered with the calm certainty of a man who knew the geopolitical weight of every digit. Trump's reaction was visible even through his signature composure. $1 trillion isn't merely money, it's a lever capable of shifting entire industries. It's the kind of capital injection that can tilt technological races, reshape the energy sector, and alter the global balance of power. And Mohammed bin Salman didn't arrive with vague promises. He arrived with structured allocations, line-by-line budgets, and a timeline already carved into internal Saudi documents. The largest portion, roughly $380 billion, was assigned to America's artificial intelligence boom, specifically targeting defense neural networks, autonomous surveillance grids, and next-generation manufacturing robots. For Trump, who had campaigned on restoring American industrial dominance, this alone was a political masterstroke. Another $210 billion was set aside for civil nuclear development. New reactors, enriched fuel supply chains, and shared intellectual property models that would tie Washington and Riyadh together for decades. But the most controversial segment was the $260 billion earmarked for strategic minerals. These weren't ordinary metals. They were the rare earth elements powering missiles, quantum computers, laser-guided weapons, and electric vehicle batteries. China had dominated this field for years. Now Trump was standing beside the man attempting to break that monopoly in one calculated move. The remaining $150 billion targeted America's defense manufacturing sector, missile systems, artillery modernization, satellite infrastructure, and hypersonic research hubs located in Virginia, Texas, and Colorado. Documents later revealed that part of this allocation included multi-year purchase agreements for American weaponry, agreements designed to guarantee factory jobs in politically critical states. Inside the Situation Room, advisors whispered about the scale. $1 trillion doesn't just improve relations, it welds two countries together. It drives lobbyists, corporations, and strategic planners into the same direction. It creates a relationship that cannot be rolled back without rewriting the architecture of global markets. For Mohammed bin Salman, the investment was not charity, it was a long-term play, a method of embedding Saudi Arabia into the core of America's technological future. If the US wanted to dominate AI, energy, and defense, then Saudi capital would stand at the foundation of that dominance. And if the Crown Prince wanted to future-proof his kingdom's power beyond oil, there was no better platform than the American industrial machine. By the time the doors opened and the press re-entered the room, the ink wasn't dry, but the pact was already history. $1 trillion had changed the trajectory of two nations silently and irreversibly. F-35 deal and military realignment in the Middle East. What happened next inside the Roosevelt Room was the kind of strategic shift that normally unfolds in classified briefings, not in front of camera crews waiting outside the door. For decades, one rule in American foreign policy had remained unbroken. The Middle East's most advanced weapon, the F-35 Lightning II, a fifth-generation stealth fighter valued at $110 million per jet, would never be sold to any Arab nation. The aircraft's radar-evading skin, its encrypted communication systems, and its ability to strike targets before being detected were considered too sensitive, too technologically sacred to be exported beyond Israel. Yet on this November afternoon, Donald Trump broke the rule. The Crown Prince sat across the table, flanked by defense ministers and national security strategists. When Trump confirmed what analysts long dismissed as impossible, the United States would authorize the sale of the F-35 to Saudi Arabia. It wasn't a symbolic sale, it was a procurement package on a scale rarely seen outside wartime. Over 40 aircraft, supported by a logistical network worth another $8 billion, including spare engines, stealth coating maintenance suites, weapons integration labs, and encrypted data links. But the fighter jets were only the beginning. Stacked inside the classified annex of the agreement were additional orders, nearly 300 American Abrams tanks, each costing roughly $9 million, along with long-range air defense batteries, anti-ship missile systems, and maritime radar networks designed to monitor the Persian Gulf in real time. When fully delivered, the package represented close to $70 billion in military hardware and training pipelines. Pentagon officials understood what this meant. The balance of power in the Middle East was shifting rapidly, deliberately, and in a direction that would reshape deterrence for decades. The sale was more than a transaction. It was a transfer of capability. It gave Saudi Arabia the same class of fighter jet used by US carrier strike groups. It gave them the tank formations used by American armored divisions. It gave them maritime detection systems that could track hostile aircraft before engines were even heard over the horizon. But it also revealed something deeper. The United States was preparing to share the burden of Middle Eastern security. For years, Washington had tried to pivot toward Asia, yet the region's conflicts, Yemen, Syria, Iranian proxy networks, kept pulling American forces back in. With this deal, Trump was signaling a new direction. Saudi Arabia would become the frontline state, equipped with the hardware and surveillance infrastructure to respond without waiting for American intervention. Inside the Pentagon, analysts studied simulation models showing how the F-35 would alter Saudi interception ranges, how the tanks would shift ground combat odds, and how the radar chains would reduce Iran's first strike advantage. Intelligence briefers warned that Tehran would view the deal as an existential threat. But Trump and Mohammed bin Salman understood the political message. The US-Saudi partnership was evolving from financial alignment to military synchronization. By the time the two leaders exited the room to face reporters, the global arms landscape had been rewritten. The Middle East's future would no longer be defined only by diplomacy, but by the roar of $110 million aircraft now destined for Riyadh, the Mini-NATO defense pact, and coordinated strike on Iran. Long before the cameras captured the handshake between Donald Trump and Mohammed bin Salman, the real story had already unfolded deep beneath the White House, inside the vaulted Situation Room, where screens glowed with satellite feeds and encrypted maps of the Middle East. It was here that Trump revealed the operation that transformed a diplomatic visit into a seismic strategic shift. Earlier, in 2025, in an action known only to a handful of American and Saudi officials, the two nations had executed a coordinated strike against Iran's nuclear infrastructure. The operation was built with precision. American surveillance satellites, each worth nearly $1.2 billion, tracked Iranian enrichment sites in real time, while Saudi intelligence supplied human ground verification from border regions and covert networks. When the assault began, US drones launched from concealed bases, carrying munitions costing $85 billion per round, designed specifically to penetrate fortified underground chambers. Saudi forces simultaneously targeted auxiliary facilities, using precision-guided missiles sourced from a defense package valued at $4.6 billion. What shocked observers wasn't just the success of the mission, but the level of coordination. This wasn't a one-sided American strike. It was a joint operation synchronized to the minute, with Saudi and American war rooms connected through encrypted, quantum-resistant communication nodes installed earlier that year. For intelligence analysts, it became the clearest sign that the relationship between the two countries had entered a new phase, one driven not by historical habits, but by strategic necessity. And this cooperation was not a one-off event. It was the blueprint for something even larger, a bilateral defense agreement quietly referred to inside the Pentagon as the Mini-NATO pact. Unlike traditional alliances burdened by numerous member states and bureaucratic constraints, this pact was designed to be lean, immediate, and unambiguous. If Saudi Arabia were attacked, the United States would respond automatically, with air power, cyber defense, and rapid deployment assets capable of moving from Virginia to Riyadh in under 14 hours. If the US faced a threat in the Gulf, whether from missile launches, maritime blockades, or proxy militias, Saudi Arabia would activate its full defense network, including radar arrays and anti-missile systems worth more than $9 billion. The pact also included a new shared command center to be built outside Riyadh, funded jointly at $3.2 billion. Inside, analysts from both countries would sit in front of AI-driven threat detection platforms capable of processing 18 million data points per second. The system was designed to identify missile launches, drone swarms, or cyber intrusions within milliseconds, providing a level of early warning previously reserved for superpower alliances. But perhaps the most consequential part of the agreement was the shift in military burden. For years, the United States had shouldered the responsibility of stabilizing the Gulf, deploying carrier strike groups that cost $6.5 million per day to operate. Under the new model, Saudi Arabia would take the lead on regional containment, backed by American technology, weaponry, and treaty-level guarantees. When Trump and the Crown Prince eventually stepped back into the sunlight for the press conference, reporters saw a photo op, but strategic planners saw something else entirely. The United States and Saudi Arabia had just locked themselves into a defense structure bold enough to redraw power lines from Tehran to Tel Aviv. Social reforms, power consolidation, and the Israel question. While the US-Saudi negotiations focused on trillion-dollar investments and stealth jet diplomacy, another story unfolded quietly in the background, one rooted not in weapons or money, but in the internal transformation of Saudi Arabia itself. For years, Mohammed bin Salman had been reshaping the social fabric of his kingdom with a combination of ambition, disruption, and tightly controlled authority. And those transformations weren't cosmetic. They were engineered to redefine Saudi identity for a generation that had grown restless with the constraints of the past. Inside Riyadh, the most symbolic shift came with the dismantling of the religious police, an institution that once patrolled streets, enforced dress codes, and dictated public behavior. Their powers were curtailed almost overnight. Cafes that previously had segregated seating quietly unified their spaces. Concerts, once unimaginable, began drawing crowds of young Saudis waving neon bracelets and filming with smartphones. Global artists performed on stages built with sound systems costing $2.5 million, equipment imported specifically for a new entertainment era. Women's rights also moved forward, though cautiously. The lifting of the driving ban in 2018 set the tone, but by 2025, the reforms expanded into professional sectors once considered off-limits. Saudi women took executive roles in state-backed companies, some overseeing strategic projects worth hundreds of millions of dollars. University programs introduced mixed-gender workshops, and newly opened business districts in Jeddah displayed glass-walled offices designed to symbolize transparency, both literal and political. But these shifts were only half the story. Even as public life modernized, political authority condensed around the Crown Prince with quiet but unmistakable precision. Key ministries underwent restructuring, internal security agencies adopted updated surveillance networks valued at $900 million, using AI-based monitoring tools developed through joint ventures with American firms. Critics disappeared from social media, not through chaos, but through systematic, meticulously planned governance. Modernization was permitted, but only on the Crown Prince's terms. This duality, social openness paired with political tightening, created a paradox that fascinated global observers. And nowhere was this tension more visible than in the Crown Prince's stance on Israel. Donald Trump, eager to expand the Abraham Accords, pressed Mohammed bin Salman for full normalization between Israel and Saudi Arabia. The economic logic was undeniable: joint tech hubs, defense cooperation, and access to Israel's cyber intelligence sector, which housed systems valued at more than $4 billion annually. Diplomatically, it promised to reshape Middle Eastern alliances once again. But the Crown Prince stood firm. He would not move without a structured, verifiable roadmap for a Palestinian state. Clear borders, guaranteed rights, and phased recognition. This wasn't ideology, it was strategic leverage. Saudi Arabia commanded religious, economic, and geopolitical influence unmatched in the region. Any agreement bearing its signature would define the next chapter of Middle Eastern diplomacy. Inside the White House, negotiators felt both opportunity and resistance. Saudi Arabia was transforming internally, and the Crown Prince held every card. And, as long as the Palestinian question remained unresolved, the final piece of Trump's regional vision hung just out of reach: Cristiano Ronaldo's role in the most unlikely diplomatic moment. No one inside the White House that night expected the room to shift the moment a second motorcade door opened. Diplomats leaned forward, journalists froze mid-sentence, and security teams instinctively widened their stance. Because stepping out, under the same floodlights that had greeted heads of state for decades, was Cristiano Ronaldo, not in a stadium, not lifting a trophy, but walking into the highest political building in the world as if it were another Champions League final. Ronaldo's presence wasn't accidental. He had arrived in a custom-tailored black suit valued at $18,000, wearing a watch from his personal collection worth nearly $140,000, a subtle reminder that he wasn't just a guest, he was a symbol of Saudi Arabia's new cultural confidence, its global expansion through sports, entertainment, and celebrity diplomacy. His contract with Al Nassr, worth more than $200 million per year, wasn't simply a football deal. It was an investment into soft power, visibility, and global influence. Inside the White House gala, the energy shifted instantly. American officials, many of whom rarely paid attention to world football, were suddenly drawn to the conversations forming around Ronaldo. Saudi delegates watched closely, understanding the purpose of his presence. In Washington, political influence can come from money, military deals, or strategic alliances, but fame, global, borderless, emotionally charged fame, can open doors even trillions of dollars struggle to unlock. Trump himself greeted Ronaldo with the kind of theatrical enthusiasm he reserves for entertainers he personally admires. Cameras captured the moment, and within minutes, images of Ronaldo at the White House flooded social media platforms across the world. Saudi media amplified the optics, American news outlets debated the symbolism, European commentators speculated on whether this appearance marked Ronaldo's transition into cultural ambassadorship. Behind closed doors, conversations stretched beyond football. Saudi officials discussed hosting international friendlies, possibly arranging a Portugal-United States showcase match, an event valued at $35 million in projected sponsorships and broadcast rights. More importantly, Ronaldo's presence softened the visual tone of a summit otherwise dominated by military deals, nuclear conversations, and trillion-dollar investments. He made the alliance feel modern, accessible, and culturally forward-facing. For Saudi Arabia, this moment spoke louder than any press release. They weren't just bringing money to America, they were bringing celebrities, influence, youth appeal, and global attention, elements Washington rarely received from diplomatic partners. Ronaldo didn't negotiate any treaties that night, but he reshaped the narrative around the Crown Prince's visit in a way no politician could. Comment below, do you think Ronaldo's appearance was pure symbolism or a strategic move that could redefine how nations use celebrities in diplomacy? As the Saudi Crown Prince walked through the East Room with Donald Trump and Cristiano Ronaldo at his side, it became clear that America had entered a new era, one driven not by speeches, but by trillion-dollar commitments, stealth jet diplomacy, and celebrity soft power. The world rarely witnesses a moment where politics, money, and cultural influence collide this perfectly. If this breakdown opened your eyes to how quickly alliances can shift, make sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel. And stay tuned. Part 2 will uncover the hidden agreements both nations refused to put on paper.